So, food on TV lives in this kind of weird space where nobody cares how much the ingredients cost and nobody ever messes up. Meanwhile, food on the internet lives in a stock photography world where nobody cares about the mess that your 15 measuring bowls just made. Nobody posts pictures of their kitchen after the cooking is done, and most of the process ends up getting glossed over. Even worse, the comment sections online are full of people who don't follow the recipe and complain about it. So I got to thinking, what if we actually gave the internet food world a real life chance? What if we actually took all the suggestions from the comments to find out exactly what we end up with? What if some non-chef or celebrity with just enough kitchen experience to operate a can opener showed you the entire process from start to finish? Well, I haven't seen that yet, so I'm going to film it. So, as an inaugural recipe, I thought maybe we'd do something like a broccoli salad. Extremely simple. There's no real cooking involved unless you want to pre-process some of the ingredients. You don't really need that many vessels to get started with. And on the plus side, it looks like something an adult might actually take to a gathering. So even if you yourself don't like broccoli, some people don't like broccoli, it's a little bit bitter, well, at least you'll look like an adult to all your friends, family, and judgmental parents.
Frozen vegetables are great for many recipes and may be better than what you can find on demand in your local grocery store. However, in the case of broccoli, and more generally whenever you're serving a vegetable raw or with minimal cooking, you want to work from fresh. Many stores now serve pre-cut and washed vegetables as well, which can be a great time saver. But if you compare the price per pound, you'll find out that you're actually paying for the convenience, so it really comes down to whether you're willing to trade your time for money, and who isn't, right? During my research for this recipe, I was warned many times to wash broccoli and cauliflower thoroughly. They're very good at holding on to dirt, and in a minimal recipe like this, your guests may be brought a bit closer to nature than they might like if you're not careful. Sometimes there's worms in there, and you don't really want that. So you're seeing here our first substitution. Broccoli and cauliflower are really closely related as a plant, but they're not necessarily similar as vegetables you eat. Cauliflower is more tender, and when cooked, generally creamier and milder. But since someone in the comments was running low on broccoli and resorted to an equivalent portion of cauliflower, so shall we. Incidentally, I probably could have used a little bit more of that head of cauliflower there. And ideally, I would have chopped it a little bit more finely than that there that you can see. That ended up being a little bit too coarse, although I think it was true to the recipe and some of the stock footage. I think it would have done a little bit better if it were a little bit looser. You will end up with something like that if you do what I did. If you have parchment paper, you can save yourself a lot of cleanup work time by using it on top of baking pans when cooking things like bacon in the oven. This recipe calls for bacon, incidentally, as do virtually all broccoli salad recipes, but as someone on the internet only had pancetta to work with, so do we. So basically, just kind of get a gauge of the size of your pan and just trim your parchment paper to size. If you don't have it, it's not the end of the world. You usually don't have to grease the pan when you're using something like a bacon or a pancetta. They'll pretty much grease the pan on their own. So just lay them out and throw them in the oven for your recommended cooking time, usually 5 minutes to a side, or just watch your recipes. And in the oven they go. And a cautionary note, I found that pancetta shrinks quite a bit more than bacon does, or at least it seems to, because it's a circle. Frankly, using it for this recipe was probably a little bit of a waste. Regular bacon would have been easier to work with, cheaper, and you'd end up with the same results. So now we're just chopping an onion. A standard broccoli salad recipe generally calls for red onions, which are sweeter in flavor. I'd also recommend a Vidalia onion or even shallots, as those are generally sweeter still. However, we found several commenters online using every sort of onion under the sun in their recipes, and so we've been somewhat hobbled by a standard yellow onion here, which is not generally sweet. As the tasters may say, I don't recommend this. You're probably going to want to go with a sweeter onion for a broccoli salad. Also, I'm not very good at cutting onions. I had to recut some of it, but that's life, and that happens. There were quite a few complaints online about how bitter the broccoli was, and the yellow onions weren't going to do us any favors in that respect either. So we opted to throw them under the broiler for a bit to mellow them out without softening them a great deal. Or at least that's what the internet claimed would happen, but that did not pan out. Once your pancetta is brown and become crispy, remove it from the oven and chop. Add it to whatever cheese you've opted to use. The recipe called for a medium cheddar, but commenters substituted standard Mexican-American shredded cheese and shredded Parmesan. But let me tell you, cheddar would have been better here. Also, don't touch the knife like that. That's bad. Also, get a bigger cutting board than the one that I'm using. If you noticed earlier with the broccoli, it should have been like 3 times that size. This is a baby cutting board. And of course, this is the failed broccoli cauliflower experiment. I do not recommend this part of it. If it were only cauliflower, this might make sense, but the onions and the broccoli really just lost something in the equation. They really didn't help out at all. But hey, that's what happened, right? And now for the sauce. The recipe called for red wine vinegar and lemon juice, which I would have loved to have used. But as someone with a pantry on its last legs only had balsamic vinegar, this was substituted for both. I'll go ahead and kill the suspense and tell you not to do that, especially if you don't have any mayonnaise around and need to use non-fat plain yogurt instead, which was another substitution that didn't live up to its meager promises. And of course, sucralose was substituted here for sugar. Honestly, that was probably okay, but it did nothing to bring this recipe back from the brink that the somewhat separated low-fat yogurt and balsamic vinegar replacement brought to the dish. Then, of course, you're going to go back to the internet, make sure that you've gotten all of the components right so far, and you're going to add your seasonings. And eventually, you're going to whisk your sauce at 6 times playback speed. With any small amount of luck, you stuck closer to the recipe than I was forced to. It was about 3 steps closer to a vinaigrette than a tame broccoli salad. Mix it all together, and you'll end up with something that looks roughly like this. We'll find out what our tasters had to say in just a little bit. But again, let me caution you. I made these mistakes, so you don't have to, dear viewer. These mistakes are not for you. Look at it. Don't ever even try it. It's just a pile of mess. Meanwhile, we're on to our second dish, a home-cooked cheeseburger. A burger is the opposite of complex. It's something you can get nearly anywhere around the world, but have you ever made your own? It's one of the rare foods that just about anybody can wander into a kitchen and turn out a fantastic example of, so long as you follow a few simple rules. Somewhat hilariously, these burgers required far less fuss and work than the broccoli salad did, despite being the main dish. That wasn't my assumption beforehand, but as things kind of progressed, it quickly became apparent that the broccoli salad was not going to be pulling its full weight. Yay for experimentation, I guess. So we're following a popular recipe promising the most juicy burgers imaginable. It revolves around adding an egg, breadcrumbs, and evaporated milk to the meat for moisture, and Worcestershire sauce, cayenne pepper, and garlic for flavor. However, we found that nearly a quarter of the comments online complained that the recipe was either too close to meatloaf in execution or generally lacked flavor. I was feeling a bit bad about serving that botched broccoli salad to our tasters, so this time I was happy to see that most of the recommended substitutions were sane and addressed the most common complaints. Fair warning though, these substitutions and changes were not health oriented by any stretch of the imagination. I really don't know what the per burger calorie count would be, but if you're concerned about that, this is probably not a recipe you want to follow in my footsteps on. So first we got the fattiest ground beef possible. I was able to find 25% fat. Everyone online says, and I think our experimentation bore out, that that is the key to juicy homemade burgers. If you want healthy, cook something else instead. It helps that this is usually the cheapest ground beef too. Secondly, we doubled the amount of garlic as it would be cooked during the recipe. We also shamelessly added MSG. It occurs naturally, and most of its side effects have yet to be confirmed in a clinical setting. Or, in other words, people react to MSG when they're told they're eating it, not when they actually do. So try it. Just about every grocery store sells it. Panko were substituted for normal breadcrumbs, just a Japanese breadcrumb, slightly different. We added black pepper, a pinch of herbs of Provence, substituted heavy cream for evaporated milk, added dehydrated onions, and fried onions as well. I wasn't sure how this would all pan out at this point, but at least it wouldn't be bland. Now for the golden rule that I, as a beginner in the kitchen, have learned the hard way: do not overwork your ground beef. The more you work it, the gummier it will get. Since we're not grilling this outdoors over slats, you don't need a great deal of cohesion. Just pretend you're trying to fluff up snow with your hands. Then forget what you're doing with your hands and wash them. Now, as you approach the stove, lightly, very lightly, hand form the patties. This is what makes a home patty different from whatever you're going to get in a restaurant or a fast food joint. Don't worry about making perfect circles either. If they sort of fall into 2 or 3 pieces on the pan, that's fine. You'll be able to see through the center of the patty, and you can watch for doneness directly if you don't want to use a thermometer. Also, some of you may know this, if you're using supermarket ground beef, you probably don't want to leave too much pink in there. Grinding beef redistributes surface bacteria to the center of the meat from the patty perspective, so you want to make sure that it's all decently cooked to the same level you would expect the outside of your, for instance, steak to be cooked to. We also used the rest of the pancetta as a bacon substitute here. While it was nice to have round bacon slices, as you can see, they shrank enough that they were more or less just little hats for the beef. You probably don't want to waste money like that. So once you see color getting up to the halfway point of the patty, flip once. If you have shredded cheese to use up from your last cooking project, feel free to throw that on about 3/4 of the way through cooking. And then a neat trick is to place a pan holding your hamburger buns over the top of the pan you're cooking in. This will help to melt the cheese properly and also warm the buns. Once the cheese is mostly melted, feel free to add any other topping that you want to be served warm. We opted for French fried onions in this case, but of course there's any number of toppings that you might want to be served warm on your burger. Also, a cool note, because we're using a cast iron pan here, we can do a great job of maintaining the heat of the food. Turn off the heat and build the burgers in the pan, so long as there isn't a great deal of grease already in the bottom that would get in the way. Cold burger fixings can kind of sap the life out of the flavor once it hits the table if you're not careful, and you really don't want to do that. Incidentally, more than one person in the household was seen to approach the pan after cooking and pick the bits of cheese and fried onion out of it. You may need a fly swatter or ruler or some kind of self-defense device to shoo off guests and ensure kitchen safety. Now, of course, this, if you're anything like me, this is the scary part of the meal. This is where the food that you just made actually goes to someone who's going to tell you whether they like it or not. So yeah, let's see how that turns out, shall we?
broccoli salad, I'm used to mayonnaise. So it's not as thick, I guess. It's more. Is there soy sauce in it?
I don't know. Is there soy sauce in it? Is it Worcestershire sauce? What's making it brown?
Something was replaced with balsamic vinegar.
Oh, okay.
Balsamic vinegar.
That's what I'm tasting then.
The vinegar.
Yeah.
Definitely not used to vinegar in it.
It is quite vinegary.
I think I'm used to my broccoli salad being sweet.
Me too.
Okay. It's not bad. It's just not common.
I think I'm also used to it being a little creamier.
I like the cauliflower. It's almost easier to bite into.
Right.
Okay. Burger time.
Burger time. Good burger.
That's a good burger. I like it. I like a good handmade patty.
It's quite chewy. It's not too dry.
It's good.
Does it have as much flavor as you want from a burger?
It's a very flavorful burger.
Yeah. I like the flavor.
All the people online said that the recipe was bland, so there was a ton of spices added to it.
Well, I think also, like a lot of the burgers we're used to don't usually have so much seasoning anyway, so it's a very, very flavorful burger.
I like it.
So, you should turn off this camera